The economy creates 33,000 new jobs last month as the labour market stays hot. An independent review considers a drastic overhaul of the Reserve Bank's board, and 4 and 20 pies are no longer Aussie owned. It's Friday, the 16th of September, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Have you been watching the processions and the queues lining up to see the Queen lying in state?
Oh, goodness me. It is really quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, obviously, everything to do with this is going to be very precise and very well ordered, but the queue, that queue to be able to see the Queen lying in state is just extraordinary. The sheer number of people and the fact that they are willing to wait so long as well.
And all these bloggers are out there lining up for 4 and 5 kilometres, so that could be 8 or 9, up to 12 hours, blogging as they go, not really saying anything in particular, but it's just extraordinary.
I don't know how much you can say when the queue moved 1 foot. But anyway, look, it's you can tell that obviously it's a chance for people to be part of history, really, and I understand that. And you think giving up half a day or a day to sit in the queue or stand in the queue, I actually do kind of understand it.
Yeah, I do too. And of course, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, Governor General David Hurley and others are jetting to the UK for the funeral, which is on Monday UK time. That will be quite a spectacle. And, I think a fantastic send-off, or hopefully a fantastic send-off for a pretty remarkable woman.
Yeah, completely agree on that one. All right, we've got a bit coming up today, Sean. After the show, your interview is with Artur Bergman, who is the founder and chief architect of a company called Fastly.
Remember last year when a bunch of global websites, from the New York Times to Amazon and the British government, went offline?
I do remember that. It actually caused quite a stir, didn't it?
Yes, well, that was because of a problem at Fastly. And Artur is the boss of Fastly, and we ask him all about that, what they learned and how they'll do things differently. It is a fascinating chat because this is a global leader that links all these cloud services together, and what happens when it goes wrong and a huge amount of the internet goes down. Great chat.
It is a fantastic chat. Little bit uncomfortable at times.
But there's a tumbleweeds moment there when I asked him, so what went wrong? And there just wasn't a lot going on there in the conversation, but stick with it. Well worth a listen.
It is well worth just listening for that, because it is a great example of a company that's learning from a pretty public problem. So it's definitely stick around. That's coming up a little bit later on. But before we get there, Sean, the main story this morning, the unemployment rate ticked up a touch to 3.5% last month, but the labour market is still very strong.
Yes, the Bureau of Statistics labour force figures did little to suggest the Reserve Bank won't be lifting interest rates again soon, though some economists pointed out that there are very, very early signs of a peak in the labour market. More than 33,000 new jobs were created in the month of August. Now, almost 59,000 full-time jobs were created, while 25,000 or so part-time jobs were lost. Not surprisingly, the number of hours worked rose and the participation rate jumped. It's now back close to record levels. The number was pretty much on what the market expected, given the surprise 41,000 job losses during July.
Okay, so we say that the market is still pretty hot. How long can it remain that way?
Very good question. The unemployment rate is what's known in economics as a lagging indicator. So it's one of the last indicators to change when an economy turns. Certainly the labour market is hot, and there's about one vacant job for every unemployed person at the moment. Job ad figures are still very strong, and businesses are continually saying that their biggest worry is finding the right people to do jobs. So the short answer is the strong jobs market is likely to continue for some months yet. Plenty of market economists still expect the unemployment rate to head lower in the coming months. So that's what the jobs market is up to.
Okay, Sean, this is one of those moments when I finally just realised something that we've been talking about for some time, which is the difference between leading indicators and lagging indicators.
Yes. So like the job ads, the ANZ job ad series is a leading indicator. It suggests what's going to happen in the economy. The unemployment rate is a lagging indicator. It tells you what did happen in the economy.
Gosh, I love it when I learn things from you.
Sort of.
There we go. And so, look, okay, putting all that together, what's it mean for the economy broadly and probably more specifically for interest rates?
Well, the Reserve Bank has no reason to pause on its interest rate journey, and the consensus view is another couple of rate rises before the end of the year. Certainly, a strong jobs market is good for household consumption, and that's really good for the economy. But it will also push up wages and potentially inflation, and too much of that isn't such a good thing.
So how did local markets respond?
Well, the S&P ASX 200 had a much better day yesterday than the sell-off on Wednesday. It closed up 0.2% to 6,843 points. Energy stocks did best and financials also outperformed. The real estate investment trusts were the biggest laggards. ANZ jumped 3.3%. That was one of the best of the large caps. Westpac and National Australia Bank were both up more than 1.5%. Minor South 32 went ex-dividend, dropping more than 7%. The best performer was coal group Coronado Global Resources, which finished up more than 9%. Fellow coal groups New Hope and Whitehaven Coal finished up 6% and 4.4% respectively. Energy giant Woodside jumped 4.2%. They were all the best. Next was the Star, the casino group, a little bit out of the box. It jumped more than 4%. Now, of course, early this week, we got the release of the New South Wales inquiry into the group, which suggested it could lose its licence. Obviously, when the analysts and investors read the fine details, they thought, things aren't so bad. Worst on the day was lithium group Lake Resources, down nearly 13%. It's down almost 25% over the past week.
And obviously, big week for international markets. What's the latest?
Well, it's a lot calmer over the past 24 hours or so. Of course, before that, US inflation printed higher than expected, sending equity markets and bond markets lower. Still, the debate about how much the Federal Reserve will lift interest rates continues and what that means for the US economy and whether it goes into recession. Oil prices are oscillating around a bit while gold is back below $1,700 an ounce. The Aussie dollar fell back a bit after the 11:30 a.m. labour force announcement yesterday before popping back up. It's currently trading around 67.5 US cents.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, an independent review of the Reserve Bank of Australia has suggested a board shake-up, introducing more monetary policy experts and possibly fewer business people to set interest rates.
That's right. An independent panel is reviewing the central bank and yesterday gave some insight into what it's thinking. The panel's considering asking what individual board members voted for when they had to cast their ballot for interest rates. Now, that is disclosed on the US Federal Reserve Board, but it's not disclosed here. We're talking about the individuals. Away from the board, the review is considering improving the accountability of the Reserve Bank for its decision-making and also improving the bank's communication with the public. The bank for a long time has been very much a black box to many members of the public, though I must say in more recent years, certainly via its website, it's managed to communicate a lot better. The panel made a few other interesting observations. 61 of the bank's 1,400 staff earn an income of more than $230,000. Women make up 44% of employees, up from 26% 10 years ago. And the panel wants to have a really decent look at how climate change can impact interest rate decisions. The idea there is that the bank is taking a medium to long-term view, so sometimes it has to make a decision on interest rates, which up front may not make sense in the short term, but does in the medium to long term, or at least that's what the panel's talking about.
Sean, our resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas, is obviously a close watcher of the Reserve Bank. I'll be interested to hear from him on Monday for the week ahead and see what he says about the recommendations.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. Stephen always has a view on these things. He comes from Treasury, of course, though, and Treasury versus Reserve Bank has always been sort of going back decades, Treasury and Reserve Bank. Never the two will meet. Now, many of them are great friends, I'm sure, but you either came out of one or the other. So Stephen did come out of Treasury, I'd like to say.
All right, well, we'll see what he says on Monday. Now, the big banks are adding tools to their apps, and flavour of the month seems to be budgeting tools.
That's right. In terms of bank apps, Commonwealth Bank ranks number one among customers and has done for several years, but Westpac is closing the gap in second, according to research group Forrester. Yesterday, Westpac added a budgeting tool to its revamped banking app and hopes it will cause customers to use the app more regularly and increase loyalty. I think they're more worried about customers going to fintechs rather than other big banks. The new product will help customers budget and track spending and offer financial insights to customers. Now, Commonwealth Bank already lets customers set limits for spending in some categories and shows them monthly cash flow statements. ANZ also provides transaction and spend data. It's kind of the new frontier of competition among the banks, as much to ward off fintechs as it is each other.
And just staying with the banks, Sean, the boss of the Bankers Association, Anna Bligh, has warned that real estate values will be hit by mandatory carbon emission and energy ratings.
Yeah, I hadn't thought much about this, and that's why I think it's really interesting. Ms. Bligh said investors were forcing banks to rebalance their lending books in favour of lower emissions, and that's affecting behaviour. Fair enough. But it's not only about lending to the energy and transport sectors. It's about everyday mortgages as well. If the government legislated 43% reduction in carbon emissions is to be reached by 2030, banks are going to have to look at what they lend to homeowners. And that probably means standardised energy ratings for households. So homes with higher energy ratings could well be more valuable than a neighbour's house with low energy ratings. This is going forward in the next decade or so. I hadn't thought much about that, but that is fascinating.
Yeah, it sounds like a good sleeper story, which is actually one that I'm going to reserve for our weekend edition.
Ouch.
Got into that one first, didn't I?
Yeah, I like it.
All right, now just quickly, Sean, there were some comments as well out of the transport sector yesterday, which kind of had a similar flavour.
Yeah, what is interesting is that all these different sectors of the economy are thinking about this a lot more than ever before, particularly because of that legislation. Now, a report from the National Transport Commission said Australia's love affair with dual cab utes, that's you, Michael, and SUVs, it's me, are hampering decarbonisation efforts, even as more electric vehicles are on the road. Also, there's not that many clean vehicle options are available at affordable prices in Australia. Now, transport generates about 18% of national CO2 emissions, and the report says to achieve decarbonisation targets, people need to stop buying energy-efficient vehicles. Stop the dual cab utes. Stop the SUVs. Don't know whether it's going to happen, but it's a fair point.
Yeah, that's a bit of a worry, isn't it?
It is.
Well, for the two of us, clearly, because we're a little bit biased, loving both of those two categories.
Yeah.
All right, moving on, department store Myer has posted its best financial results since 2018 with a 17% jump in net profit. It's not that often that we have such a good news story about Myer, is it?
And encouragingly, sales since the end of Myer's financial year, which is July 30, have remained strong. While higher cost of living expenses and interest rates have hurt some sectors, not Myer, not yet anyway, the department store said it had posted its best start to a new financial year since 2006. Chief Executive John King said sales were particularly strong in menswear and high-end fragrances, while homewares had also done well. Now, Myer's share price fell more than 1% yesterday, but it has made a remarkable recovery. It is 6 times higher than in March 2020. It got down to about 10 cents. It's now about 62 cents or thereabouts. Also, we used to talk about Kogan.com. Remember the pandemic darling? In the midst of the pandemic, Kogan.com was more than twice as large as Myer. Now Myer is bigger than Kogan. There you go.
What a comeback.
What a comeback.
Okay, now the 4 and 20 pie, Sean, which I know is one of your favourites, and lean cuisine meals are Aussie no longer. A Hong Kong-based company has bought Paddy's Foods.
I don't mean to be parochial or anything here, Michael, but... Pacific Alliance Group is one of the largest private equity funds in Asia, and it reportedly spent around $500 million buying Paddy's, which also includes products under the brands of Nana's, Herbert Adams, Chef's Pride, and Snowy River. Now, Pacific Alliance already owns Red Rooster and Oporto food chains. So they've gone to the Hong Kong-based private equity fund. Now, according to Nine Media, 4 and 20 Pies, the company was created 75 years ago by a pie maker called Leslie Thompson McClure, probably a family member of yours.
I'm sure.
Leslie Thompson McClure in Bendigo. Now, McClure sold it to Peter's Ice Cream in 1960. It then went to Simplot before being sold to Paddy's Foods in 2003. 4 and 20 Pies are now sold here, obviously, in Japan and the US as well. There you go.
Sean, I know you are now a bit of a gym junkie and you go to
yes. I'm so pleased you brought that up. Yeah.
F45 sessions every day, so I don't think you'll be doing this. But can I make a very quick pie recommendation?
Yes.
Get a pie, any pie, 4 and 20 pie, perhaps as the example from this.
Yeah.
Go to the bakery, buy the biggest bread roll you can find, and put the pie inside the bread roll, bit of tomato sauce in there. It is a
Wouldn't have too many carbs.
Carb overload, but it is just the greatest because the bread roll catches all the meat that comes out of the pie, and it is just the greatest. Do it now while you can offset it with your F45.
That is exactly what you would do when you're traveling in Australia and you're 20 and you know that you only have, kind of $5.80 to spend for your meal that day. You go and buy a pie and bread, shove it together.
Put it inside a bread roll and away you go. Well, I reckon we'll actually hear from a few people that say, yes, they do that. And yes, it is actually a favourite. So I'll let you know on Monday. Okay, now a third La Nina event in 3 years has unfortunately been confirmed, and southeast Queensland, northern New South Wales and Western Sydney need to prepare for major flooding again this summer.
Emergency Management Minister Murray Watt warned that given how wet catchment areas are, the risk of flooding is very high. He told ABC RN Breakfast that anywhere on the East Coast or in Northern Australia is at risk from heavy rainfall and flooding. Mr Watt said the federal government was working with states to get more people back into secure housing ahead of the summer because many of the victims from the February-March floods are still in temporary accommodation.
And finally, Sean, we've spoken before about how expensive airfares are at the moment, and the latest figures show that discount fares have now more than doubled in the past 5 months.
Yes, incredible. The Bureau of Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Economics says domestic airfares are now at their highest level since the peak of the global financial crisis in 2008. And that's both business, that's you, Michael, and economy, that's me.
Sean, moving on to overseas news.
When you're in business, are you allowed to eat your pie in the bread roll or not?
Well, look, okay. The occasions when I would fly business would be very, very, very rare. But I reckon you could probably do it if you wanted to.
Yeah, I reckon you could. Certainly in first class you could, because you can do anything in first class.
Oh, absolutely. And it would be the fanciest pie you've ever eaten.
Oh, yeah.
And like a Neil Perry baked bread roll.
Yep.
Glorious.
Yep.
All right. Overseas news time. How about this one, Sean? 50 years after founding outdoor apparel maker Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard, who is the eccentric rock climber who became a fairly reluctant billionaire with his unconventional spin on capitalism, has given the company away.
Yes, he didn't sell it. He didn't list it on the stock market or anything. Instead, Chouinard, his wife and 2 adult children transferred the ownership of Patagonia, valued at about $3 billion to a specifically designed trust in a non-profit organisation. It will ensure half of the company's annual profit, which is about $100 million is used to combat climate change and protect undeveloped land around the globe, according to the New York Times. After making the decision, the 83-year-old said, "Hopefully this will influence a new form of capitalism that doesn't end up with a few rich people and a bunch of poor people." An optimist, Mr. Chouinard.
Yes, perhaps. Now, the end of COVID is in sight, according to the World Health Organization.
That's right. The number of coronavirus deaths globally last week was the lowest reported since the beginning of the pandemic, back in March 2020, marking what could be a turning point in the fight. The UN Director General said the end is in sight, but warned that nations need to keep working to reduce cases.
And finally, one of the most significant changes in the cryptocurrency world happened overnight, even though most people have probably actually heard nothing about it.
Have you, Michael? Do you know about the merge?
Not as much as I probably should, so please don't test me on it.
No, look, well, it's known as the merge, and it's basically a revamp of Ethereum. One of the big problems with cryptos is they use enormous amounts of energy to undertake their ledger balancing on the blockchain. Now, the merge will make Ethereum and its token Ether vastly more energy efficient because it won't need anywhere near as much computer power to undertake transactions. In fact, potentially, it will need up to 99% less power. Suddenly, it becomes more efficient and more manageable. In industry jargon, Michael, Ethereum is going from a proof of work mechanism to a proof of stake setup. Don't ask me about them. Anyway, it was due to happen overnight.
Well, I followed you right up until that last sentence, and that was the point at which I think you might have lost me.
I understood what I was saying up until that last sentence.
All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview, and this is one you must listen to. Artur Bergman, the founder and chief architect of Fastly.
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned, Fastly was involved, or in fact responsible, for the breakdown in the internet last year, which put many sites in the dark. But it's not really just about that. It's all about how you manage the crisis as well. And Fastly is quite an amazing company. It's one of, none of us have ever heard, well, I really hadn't heard of it until the interview came up. And you realize just what a critical point they are for you and me to be recording today, for example. Affects all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of those things that if the company's working as it should, then you would never even really know that it's there. And the only time you actually kind of pay attention to it is all of a sudden when things go wrong. So it's a cracking interview. It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 16th of September, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget, tomorrow you can hear the weekend edition of Fear and Greed. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.